There must be others here who would have known Husain. I happen to be one of them, and I very early thought of Husain. Like Ram Leela, there is a Husain Leela. And this autobiography, when he did his autobiography in Hindi, suddenly one morning at 8 o'clock, he came to my house in Shahjahan Road and wanted me to accompany him to Nirmal Verma. And I said, but why should I accompany? You know both of them and you know Ram Kumar very well. He said, no, I want you to come with me. I want Nirmal to write the introduction in Hindi to my biography. So finally we went, and he wanted that his autobiography must be released in major Hindi centers and that I should talk to writers there. So I talked to people in Bhopal, in Patna, in Banaras, in Jaipur, etc. Now what happened when the book release took place in the IIC auditorium, everything was going fine until, what was the name? Is Tabu an actress?
Yes.
She arrived. And although Nirmal Verma, I and Ram Kumar, etc. were on the stage with Husain Saab, his attention got totally on Tabu. And to cut the long story short, after that there was a taboo movement in the ceremony which had nothing to do with the... And we sort of quietly slipped out to the bar. This was Husain. And then one day after 2 months, I get a phone call from Kashinath Singh, who is a friend and a writer based in Banaras, that you asked me to organize फंक्शन, यहाँ तो कल शाम को किसी 5-star होटल में वो पुस्तक रिलीज हो गई. I didn't know about it. And I didn't know about it either. He didn't know about it. He wasn't invited. The third is, Tyeb and Husain were sitting in the lounge. I happened to go there and we sat together. I had a book of my poems coming out, my next birthday, and the publisher had come with the proofs. So Husain साहब से क्या है ये? मैंने कहा मेरी कविताओं का संग्रह. अच्छा क्या होने वाला है? हमने कहा नहीं इसका रिलीज होगा. कहा ठीक है मैं आऊँगा, मैं करूँगा. हो गया. Now on the 16th, which was my birthday, in the morning I tried to locate कि हुसैन साहब हैं कहाँ? तो फोन किया शमशाद को. शमशाद ने कहा वो तो शायद हैदराबाद में है. और हमने उनको यहाँ होना था, पता करो शायद दोपहर की फ्लाइट से आ रहे हैं. उनका नहीं, वो तो कहीं हैदराबाद से और आगे चले गए. So I had to have, luckily Anantmurthy was here and I asked him to release the book. तो हुसैन साहब की बहुत लीलाएं हैं. उनकी ऑटोबायोग्राफी उनकी जीवनी का एक हिस्सा भर कहेंगी, उसमें बहुत सारा है जो छूटा हुआ है. दूसरी बात, हुसैन शायद भारतीय परंपरा में एकमात्र चित्रकार हैं जिन्होंने रामायण और महाभारत दोनों पर चित्र बनाए. किसी और भारतीय ने नहीं बनाए. ऐसे लोग हैं जिन्होंने महाभारत पे बनाए हैं, ऐसे लोग हैं जिन्होंने रामायण पर बनाए हैं, पर एक ही चित्रकार द्वारा 2 महाकाव्यों पर चित्र बनाना, वो उन्होंने राम मनोहर लोहिया के दोस्ती में या दबाव में बनाए थे. वो पित्ती परिवार के पास हैं और अब वो धीरे धीरे अलग अलग बिक रहे हैं दुर्भाग्य से. तो उनकी इंटीग्रिटी खत्म हो जाएगी. बट दिस इज ऑल्सो वॉट हुसैन कुड डू. एक बार मुझे उन्होंने, मेरे पास कैसे गायब हो गया, गालिब की जन्म शताब्दी पर या गालिब के मृत्यु के 100 साल पर गालिब के शेरों पर कुछ रेखांकन किए थे और उर्दू और देवनागरी में उन शेरों को लिखा था और उनका एक फोलियो जैसा बनाया था. वो एक कॉपी मुझे उन्होंने दी थी, वो पता नहीं कहाँ गायब हो गई, मिल ही नहीं रही। इसका कहीं उल्लेख ही नहीं आता कि उन्होंने गालिब को भी चित्रित किया है, उन्होंने महाभारत को भी चित्रित किया है, रामायण को भी चित्रित किया। तो इसलिए उनकी लीला अपरंपार है। और चूँकि रामलीला कभी खत्म नहीं होती, सो हुसैन लीला भी कभी खत्म होने वाली नहीं है। जैसा किशोर कह रहे थे कि अगले कई सदियों तक हम उनकी चर्चा करते रहेंगे। चलिए वापस।
Wonderful remarks and insights, Ashokji, and a very exhilarating session on M.F. Husain. We are going to the last session now, and the last session aptly is on S.H. Raza. The paper presentations are by Ashna Asif, Katyayani Singh, Priyavrat Soni, and I welcome our chairperson, Uddayan Vajpayee ji. Please do come.
I'll do is that I'll first, is it okay? What I'll do is that I'll first say something about Raza Sahab and then ask each one of them to speak, and then of course the house will be open. So Uncle, friends, like Husain, Raza Sahab's works are also seen in many different ways, and more so because what he does is not figurative, at least in the later part of his, much later, even slightly early later part of his painting. Even I have written 2-3 articles on his works, and both of them were quite different from each other. So there are different ways of looking. And Raza paintings allow that. In a sense, when you look at the painting, or when you do some kind of critique or write a criticism of any work, whether literary or painterly or cinematic work, I always keep one thing. I'm reminded of a wonderful essay that I read of an art critic. I think he's English, he's a Jewish English person called Gabriel Jojupovici. And he wrote a most outstanding essay on Lolita. And after you read that review, the Lolita becomes another novel. It doesn't remain that novel which could be given to somebody to decide whether it is obscene or not. He just reads it like that, because I do think that each novel or each work of art are in themselves many works of art. So if you open one door, you enter into another art, another book. And what Gabriel Jojupovici did was that he saw this desire of Humbert to acquire beauty. And because it cannot be acquired, it cannot be possessed, so he has to move from one person to the next, to yet another. So he completely rewrote the novel. I'm not going to make Raza's paintings, but there's a different way that I want to look into his painting, because I find them very close to haikus, because there's very limited information there. There are a lot of painters like Krishen Khanna yesterday that there's a lot of information there. But in Raza's works, the information is minimal. It's almost not there. And haikus are like that, and therefore, to me, haiku is a very, very great form of poetry. And I know that there's one haiku that Basho wrote, as everybody must be knowing, that an ancient pond, frog jumps, splash. Now on this, I have read 150 commentaries of the Japanese critics. So you can go, because if information is reduced, then the possibility of seeing it differently, opening that form differently, becomes multiple. Now, Raza was born in a very small place in Madhya Pradesh, in a tribal district of Mandla, and his father was a forester, a forest ranger there. So he lived in the forest. Most of his childhood was spent there. Then he was a very restless child. I mean, he will not sit quietly in his classroom. He will not sit quietly in his house. He would just be restless all the time. And to deal with this restlessness of his, one of his teachers made a dot on the wall, and this is a very famous story about Raza. And the teacher said, you go on looking at this dot continuously, which he did. And this completely changed the attention of the child. Now he could sit quietly in his class. He could attend to things. He could pay attention to things. That this point, this little dot on the wall, was very, very significant in his life. Then, of course, he went for his further education to Nagpur, then to Bombay. And this is all known, during one of his visits to Kashmir, he meets this wonderful photographer, Henri Bresson, who suggests him to go to Paris to learn construction. Now, it was not as if in those days everybody in Paris was making the paintings in this constructivist form. It was Cézanne, of course, was exhibited there. He was not alive then. But already Henri Matisse had overcome that constructivism, and he was doing something much different. But anyway, Raza went there, and he found his way to go to Paris. And but all the while, when he was learning in one place after the other, behind his mind there was this very deep desire of coming back, returning back to home. And maybe it was completely unconscious, but this idea of return was very, very acute in his mind. Must have been in his mind, I'm just imagining. And he must be feeling like most of the people feel that, we'll do our things and then we'll go back. This whole feeling of going back is with all of us. I can see it in myself, and maybe we have no place to go back. And yet this very deep-seated desire to return is there in Raza, it seems. And this feeling of return, of course, makes him, when he paints, after painting the images in Paris, when he starts painting Rajasthan or Saurashtra, taking that whole place, the emotions of that place, then he paints these. These two are, he was as if recreating the India in his mind, particularly a portion of India in his mind to go back to. And then in one of his paintings slightly later, he just writes a line of Ashok's poem, Laut Kar Jab Aaunga. It's quite clear that it surfaces almost this desire to return was there in him, floating inside the water, and it comes up for oxygen maybe for a while, and this line comes. And then this, and in these years, I mean, there might be difference of the year here and there, but well, in our mind, 2, 3, 4 times they unfold together. So to write a linear history of the mind of an artist is impossible. And so he discovers this idea of bindu, and he paints this bindu. Now, it is the same bindu, the same dot that his teacher made on the wall of his school to look at. So bindu on one hand is the memory, but then bindu later becomes something. It becomes a kind of a door for the return. But at the same time that he goes on painting bindu, and once again, this bindu becomes very, very crucial in his painting. It is almost a kind of symbol for his home. And he goes on painting bindu in one painting after the other. Of course, then he theorizes also. And even in the theory, there is this subtle idea of the home lurking behind, where he says that all the universe, it's a Nad Bindu, and from the Bindu, entire universe has expanded, and into which the entire universe will come back. So the Bindu now becomes, instead of his home, it becomes the home for everybody. And suddenly this private metaphor, very personal metaphor, becomes a universal metaphor or symbol for the return itself, that the entire return would happen in this Nad Bindu. Now thus, and because, Raza knew as well as most of us know, I don't remember the philosopher who said that moderns don't have home. They have no home to go back to. Perhaps it was Heidegger, but I read it somewhere, I just forgot the name. So I think Bindu was the home which he made and which he continued making, because for us, for moderns, what Ghalib said was perfect, that बेदरो दीवार का एक घर सा बनाया चाहिए, कोई हमसाया ना हो और पासवा कोई ना हो. And now I invite, I'll go back. This ashna. Yeah. So I now request Ashna Asif to speak on Raza. In her paper, Ashna examines whether Raza's metaphysical aesthetics of Bindu can be expanded or critically reframed by examining the circular geometries of Dalit and Adivasi rural art. And these art forms offer a similarly structured but radically different worldview of these sacred motifs. The paper is comparative visual study of Raza's Bindu with Adivasi cosmograms like Kolam, Alpana, gaunt circular motifs, Baga tattoos, and Santhal ceremonial diagrams. Now, Ashna should know this, that the first museum of the Adivasi paintings actually was envisaged by this very great painter Jagdish Swaminathan in Bhopal. And it was he who made all of us see all this together. Yeah, so it is me. अब वहाँ पे बोलेंगी?
माइक को यहीं रख दी।
माइक छोड़ दे।
अल्लाह मेरे
First to answer your thing, sir. I am from Bhopal,
आपको पढ़ाई किया?
Yes.
अरे हमारे शहर क्यों?
So I was in school when the tribal museum was being built, and we went to visit it with my friends, and like we were in Amity, we were in bachelors that time, so we went and visited the museum when it was being built. So it's like I have a relationship with that museum already since a long time, but now so I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Raza Foundation for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Ashna, and I am an artist and a PhD scholar from Sachi University of Buddhist Indic Studies. Growing up in an interfaith household, I would often ask my parents, "What religion are we?" And they would answer, "You're a human." This shaped the way I learned to look at the world. My mom is an art teacher, so when I told her I wanted to pursue fine arts, it was met not with resistance, but with encouragement. And before long, I found myself searching for a PhD topic which was exploring how visionary experience emerges from Indic philosophy, Tantra, Adivasi cultures, and even prehistoric art. Naturally, I was told that my work must engage with the neo-tantric artists, which brought me to Raza and his turn towards the Bindu, and even the insightful interview he gave Ashok sir for Vadera Gallery. This was when I encountered another way of thinking about this seminal motif of Indian spirituality, which is the Bindu. And my presentation today revisits one of the most familiar symbols in Indian modernism, the Bindu. In the metaphysical reading of S.H. Raza's work, the Bindu appears as a universal emblem of spiritual modernism, what he called the center of silence, energy, and imagination, the seat in which creation and dissolution meet. Yet, Indian cosmology has another form of the Bindu, a parallel, often invisible circular geometry sustained within Dalit Adivasi ritual worlds, long preceding and coexisting alongside modernist abstraction. The central claim of my paper is that the same circular form carries radically different cosmologies depending on caste, ecology, material, and ritual context. And by reading the Bindu from below, I shift the symbol from its familiar metaphysical register towards a vernacular, embodied, and ecological understanding of sacred geometry. Indian modernism tends to treat the Bindu as an abstract, metaphysical, almost transcendental icon. However, circular geometries are deeply embedded in subaltern ritual art, within columns, in Alpana, Bega Godna tattoos, Santhal Sorai murals, and gold dots. The two representations of the Bindu appear and coexist in the same fertile soil of Indian art. It inevitably results in a comparative tension between modernist abstractions and indigenous embodiment of Bindu ideology. Today it remains a persistent dilemma for Indian artists and critics to negotiate their place within the discourse of modern art while also maintaining fidelity to indigenous cultural and aesthetic roots. A negotiation which has often been shaped and sometimes constrained by residual colonial biases. Both Bindu ontologies do not speak the same symbolic language, even if they share the same form. Transcendence means looking above and beyond the world, trying to rise out of ordinary life to reach something pure, cosmic, or otherworldly. Immanence means finding the sacred within the world, in the soil, the body, community, daily labor, and the rhythms of nature. So transcendence is the sacred up there, and immanence is the sacred right here. This paper is a comparative visual study that works across three layers. The first, a visual formal analysis that looks at symmetry, repetition, radiating color, and geometrical grammar. And the second, a cosmological, which reads the circle either as a metaphysical unity or ecological continuity. The third is caste and ecology sensitive aesthetics, recognizing that sacred geometry is not neutral, its meaning is shaped by historical access to land,
ritual labor, and social hierarchy. I argue that the Bindu is plural. Its meaning shifts across different Indian worlds rather than belonging to a single metaphysical interpretation. The framework brings together three traditions. The first, classical aesthetic thought, where Kumar describes the Bindu as the unextended seed from which all forms unfold. Abhinav Gupta interprets it as spand, the pulsation between contraction or nimisha and expansion or unmisha. In Vajrayana too, the Bindu marks the center of the mandala, the locus of the Buddha principle beyond perceived duality. This genealogy is central to Raza's metaphysical reading. Moving on to look at subaltern epistemologies, Dalit and indigenous thinkers offer a very different sacred ontology. G.N. Devi points out that indigenous art transmits cosmology through performance and collective memory, not text. Vivek Dhareshwar in his critique tells us how knowledge is relational, corporeal, and non-hierarchical. Kancha Elias Shepherd writes how Brahmanical metaphysics privileges detachment and purity, marginalizing bodily labor within subaltern cosmologies. Here, within the subaltern cultures, sacredness comes from earth, body, breath, and ecology. Key scholars that challenge the purity narratives of post-independence abstraction include Geeta Kapoor, who writes how modernism in India becomes an idealist orthodoxy. Sonal Kullar argues how the spiritual universalism in Indian modernism mirrors a caste aspiration, which aspires to rise above matter. Parul Dev Mukherjee argues that the modernist canon cleanses art of vernacular, ritual, and bodily contexts, painting upper caste philosophical systems as authentic sources of Indian spirituality. And together, these frameworks allow us to see the Bindu not as a single metaphysical symbol, but as a contested terrain, where we will discuss the working concept of vertical and horizontal transcendence. The understanding of Bindu in Indian aesthetics and cosmology is that of a primordial seed of creation. In Sanskrit metaphysical literature, it is a symbol of origin and totality of the cosmos. In Tantric and Yogic traditions, it is the junction between manifest and unmanifest, the threshold where pure consciousness manifests into form. In Vajrayana mandalas, it represents the Buddha principle from which concentric geometries unfold. This symbolic richness informs Raza's interpretation, but it is not the only lineage through which circles gain meaning. Raza returns to the Bindu in the 1980s, shifting from landscapes to what he calls the seed of energy. The Bindu becomes a metaphysical nucleus aligned with Vedanta and Tantra, yet re-articulated in modernist abstractions. The key aspect here is that the black Bindu at the center, evokes the void of consciousness. Radiating color fields echo Shakti emanating from Shiva's stillness. The painting becomes a visual yantra, a contemplative inward movement. This is the language of vertical transcendence, the aspiration towards unity beyond materiality. So here lies the tension. Post-independence Indian modernism sought a spiritual alternative to Western materialism. Artists like Raza, Gaitonde, and Gaitonde pursue transcendence through abstraction. But this spiritual abstraction often carried unacknowledged caste-coded assumptions. First being that purity is equated with abstraction, materiality is dismissed as vernacular or craft, social and bodily contexts are removed in favor of metaphysical stillness. And as Sonal Kullar argues, this accession mirrors the caste logic, rising above the world of labor, soil, and the body. This creates a paradox. The Bindu becomes a universal, yet socially detached symbol. In contrast, folk and domestic traditions embody sacredness through repetition and gesture. In the columns of Tamil Nadu, which are drawn daily by women, it begins with a seed dot and unfolds into symmetry. The rice flour which the column is made from, it feeds the ants and the birds, where ritual becomes ecology. Alpana in Bengal has concentric circles and seed points made with rice paste. This invokes the goddess energy through embodied action. These are not metaphysical diagrams, but performative cosmograms. The sacred is generated through repetition, labor, and touch. Adivasi forms intensify this idea of immanence. The Bega Godna art of Madhya Pradesh that you see here, dhatus that mark life stages, fertility, ancestry. And spirals represent the cycle of becoming. The body here becomes a living mandala, a cosmogram carried on skin. The Santhal, Sorai and Baha circles of Jharkhand also have these elements, whether they are painted during harvest festivals. The circular suns and radiating motifs signify cattle protection, fertility and agricultural cycles. The circle is inseparable from climate, land and community. Gond circularities also represent Pran, the breath of the forest. Jangar Singh Sham's radiating patterns visualize the forest as a pulsating universe. Every dot is a node of energy, a living relation. Across these traditions, circular geometry is ecological, rhythmic, and communal. This leads to a conceptual contrast. Indigenous circles express horizontal transcendence. The sacred is immanent, present in soil, body, community, and rhythm. And Raza's Bindu expresses a vertical transcendence, a metaphysical ascent towards unity, detachment, and stillness. Both these ideas use the same shape, yet they embody radically different worlds. It is crucial not to reduce this to a simple binary though. There are shared grammars, the center and the periphery, a radiating symmetry, repetition as rhythm, mandala-like composition, but the difference lies in intention and ontology. The cosmic origin of Raza's Bindu carries with it a meditative stillness that signifies metaphysical unity, while indigenous Adivasi circles tend to symbolize an ecological continuity, a continuity that comes from rhythmic renewal and a philosophy of embodied relationality. Even the location differs, with one adorning galleries while the other gracing the soil, wall or skin. These distinctions are not mere stylistic divergences but also cosmological. So what happens when we read the Bindu from below? We provincialize transcendence, grounding sacred geometry in soil, labor and caste-marked experiences. We see that Indian sacredness is not only metaphysical but also ecological, embodied and communal. We recognize that Dalit Adivasi art is not craft but a legitimate aesthetic philosophy. By rewriting Indian modernism through this dialogical approach, we understand the Bindu as polyphonic, a meeting point of many cosmologies. I feel like this reframing does not negate Raza. It completes him. If modernist abstraction opens up towards the cosmic void, subaltern cosmograms open outward to the rhythms of the earth. And together they form a fuller sacred continuum from void to soil, from transcendence to immanence, from solitary meditation to communal renewal. And to conclude, Raza's Bindu represents a metaphysical search for unity. Dalit Adivasi circles sustain the sacred through ecology, labor and community. It is the same geometry but radically different philosophies of the sacred. If Raza's Bindu opens upward to infinity, the subaltern circles spiral inward to the soil, and together they form a fuller cosmos of Indian sacred modernity. By reading the Bindu from below, we enrich Indian art history with plural, decolonial cosmologies, where elite abstraction and vernacular embodiment exist not in hierarchy but in dialogue. Thank you.
before I'll ask Katyayani Singh to come, just one that is an exceptional reading of the Bindu have become possible only if you were a citizen of Bhopal. And secondly, that this point of a vertical transcendence and the horizontal transcendence is a very well taken point. And secondly, as far as I understand, that this differentiation of the sacred and the profane in Indian tradition is a new one. I think until very late, there was a continuum, either everything is sacred or everything is profane.
Yeah.
So I think this continuum was always there, but it has broken now, maybe with the colonial intervention into our mindset. So this is wonderful, very nice. Now I'll invite Katyayani to read her paper, and it's a psychoanalytical understanding of Raza's, with a singular focus to communicate essence and mood. Raza layered his paintings with the need to understand the self. To answer his questions of selfhood, he looked at nature as a binding force as he drew from his memories of the bright sunny forests of Madhya Pradesh and the hallucinatory nature of the nights. Raza's works in the pre-Bindu era is fraught with a wish to bind these two images as seen in Black Sun 1953. This article thus aims to understand Raza's relationship with painting and his idea of what constitutes art in his pre-Bindu era, engaging with psychoanalytical notion of aesthetics. So I invite Katyayani Singh to speak. You can speak from there.
So before I would like to begin, I would like to thank the Raza Foundation for the opportunity to present this paper. So good afternoon, everybody. Today I will attempt a psychoanalytic reading of S.S. Raza's early artistic development, focusing especially on how he drew his sense of self from nature, the source of his aesthetics. In particular, I will observe how the dialectic of beauty and terror encountered in childhood underpins the symbolic emergence of his self by attempting to speak with his artwork, the Black Sun. So focusing on his pre-Bindu era, as we call it, allows us to trace his journey as a developmental process, culminating in the Bindu. The Black Sun thus marks a critical juncture foreshadowing this later symbol. This paper adopts what I call a psychoanalytic pluralism. Many psychoanalytic thinkers see artwork as a conversation between the artist and the work. The canvas is not just a passive space for the artist's thoughts or feelings. It is active and very much alive. So once the artwork is created, it takes on a life of its own while staying connected to the artist, influencing them as much as they influence it. In this way, art communicates parts of the self while also connecting the inner world of the artist to the outer world. Rather than adhering strictly to one school, I draw on multiple frameworks. These frameworks are deliberately integrated to reflect the complexity of Raza's artistic journey. So let me begin with a statement that Raza made in an interview in 2005, I believe. So he said, "The first 10 years mark our entire lives." He recalled his childhood in the forests of Madhya Pradesh, surrounded by the tribes, the dense woods, the Narmada River, and the constant presence of both beauty and danger. He describes the appearance of a tiger in the village and the recurrent flooding of the river, events that evoked both happiness and fear, awe and anguish. These encounters, he says, led me towards more and more art expression. So from a psychoanalytic perspective, these descriptions signal primal emotional imprints rather than simply episodic memories. They evoke a childhood world where the non-human environment is felt as alive, responsive, and even sublime. Here the work of analyst Harold Searles becomes particularly useful. So Searles argued that the child's emotional life is shaped not only through human relationships, but also through an intimate relationship with the non-human world. These elements of the natural world become internal objects in our inner world, and they form parts of the child's emotional and imaginative life. Infants form relationships not only with caregivers but also with the surrounding world, which can provide stability and continuity, but also psychic intensities that are potentially overwhelming. In Raza's case, the forest and the river are therefore not inert backdrops. They are emotionally charged presences. They are experienced as stable, trustworthy, and they are unmediated by parental anxiety. This allowed them to be incorporated deeply into his inner world. The beauty and peril of the natural environment became an emotional structure, one that he would continue to work through on the canvas long after he left India. It is tempting, obviously, to romanticize Raza's childhood environment as wholly stabilizing, but Searles reminds us that the non-human environment is deeply ambivalent. It can nurture, but it can also unsettle. This ambivalence resonates strongly with Raza's own categories of beauty and terror. So rather than seeing the nature as a simple good object, we must understand it as a dual emotional field, one that offers early experiences of both coherence and fragmentation. This then brings us to the question of how all these raw experiences become artistic meaning. Wilfrid Bion, another analyst I will be referring to, offers a concept that is quite helpful here. So he argues that the mind must transform overwhelming sensory and emotional experiences into coherent forms, into thoughts, symbols, images that can be held in our minds by us. So he distinguishes between what he terms as beta elements. These are raw, unassimilated emotional data, and alpha elements, which are emotionally meaningful forms created through a containing function. In infancy, this containing function is performed by the mother or any other parent. In adulthood, the internalized version of this process enables symbolic thought. Bion also gave another idea, quite crucial here, known as the selected fact. A selected fact is not just any emotionally charged memory, because we can have many of them. Rather, it is an emergent nucleus of meaning, a pattern that organizes disparate emotional elements into coherent constellation. It is something like an internal compass, which points around which understanding crystallizes. Creativity is how seemingly chaotic elements accumulate around a selected fact and gain new meaning. The selected fact does not arise automatically from childhood experience. It requires an intermediary process of containment, resymbolization, and emotional work. In the absence of a structure to contain emotion, experiences can remain chaotic. So for many artists, the artwork itself becomes this structure, a space where the rawness of life can be arranged, contemplated, and symbolically transformed. For Raza, painting becomes precisely such a container. The canvas offers a bounded, stable field within which the beauty and terror of childhood can be re-experienced in symbolic ways. In Raza's case, childhood impressions of beauty and terror remained alive, but unshaped until painting allowed him to transform them. This helps explain why his earliest works already contain proto-symbols. His early encounters with the sublime forces of nature form the raw emotional material that he would later process through artistic work into a selected fact. The selected fact itself emerges in adulthood through a profound engagement with painting as an emotional and epistemological activity. Thus, the Bindu should not be understood as a simple maturation of a childhood impression, but rather as the symbolic transformation of that primal emotional field. In addition to this, it is equally important to situate the Bindu within Raza's cultural and historical context, as well as his quote-unquote pre-Bindu paintings. Psychoanalysis cannot operate in isolation from culture, and Raza's trajectory from the forests of Madhya Pradesh to Bombay in the early years of Indian independence represents both a social and psychic transition. In Bombay, he encountered a rapidly modernizing urban culture, the complexities of post-colonial identity, and the demands of a professional art world. This environment required him to integrate his intensely personal, nature-derived emotional experiences with a socially mediated urban artistic context. The independence era offered a charged symbolic landscape. The city, in flux politically and culturally, acted as a form of collective unconscious, providing both stimulation and anxiety. Here, Raza's early work introduced him to the mechanics of composition and narrative in a structured social setting. Simultaneously, modern art offered a new formal and symbolic tool. These provided external scaffolding, expressive color, and compositional freedom, which allowed him to project and regulate intense emotional experiences. These were essential precursors to what was to come later. So when we examine Raza's pre-Bindu work, particularly the Black Sun, since it's not here on screen, we can keep that in our minds, we see the early stages of symbolic germination. At this point, Raza is already straddling two social identities. He's an Indian and he's an outsider since he's in France, childhood and adulthood, and his psyche is again split. His repeated engagement with landscape motifs reflects a patient waiting for the selected fact to emerge. The emotional dualities of his early life are processed gradually through repeated artistic encounters. The fragmentation of night and day in the forest, the oscillation between beauty and terror, and the split emotional world of his early environment are all reflected in the canvas, which acts as a space for psychic containment and transformation, allowing him to restructure his inner world. He works consciously without memory or desire, relying on an almost intuitive affective construction through geometry and form. At this stage of metamorphosis, memory would actually hinder receptivity to raw emotional experience.
Just a minute.
Okay. Which acts as a space for psychic containment and transformation, allowing Raza to restructure his inner world. He works consciously without memory or desire, and at this stage of metamorphosis, memory would actually hinder receptivity to raw emotional experience. The landscapes are thus dreamlike, a projection of Raza dreaming his state of self. In this way, the Black Sun functions both representationally and epistemologically. The sun is not merely a celestial object. It is a stabilizing force. It performs the emotional function that the Bindu would later embody. By representational, I mean that the symbols refer outward to the elements of the world, the sun. By epistemological, I mean that they are tools for thinking, ways for Raza to organize complex emotional experience. These early symbols are part of Raza's internal objective world, a world composed not only of parental objects, but also of internalized environmental objects. The early landscapes become psychic landscapes. The early forces of nature become internal forces that require symbolic organization. This brings us to an important aesthetic claim. Aesthetic experience is progressive and developmental. It helps integrate fragmented parts of the self, fosters symbol formation, and enables emotional digestion. Raza's early art demonstrates this vividly. His landscape repetitions are not simply stylistic exercises, but repeated attempts at psychic containment. Each canvas acts as a boundary, within which fragmentation can be played with, reshaped, and temporarily held. The canvas becomes the container in which this emotional oscillation from fragmentation to integration can be stabilized. Without this containment, symbol formation would actually fail. With it, Raza's pre-Bindu works becomes a sustained mediation on unity emerging from fragmentation. He is working in the oscillation between chaotic fragmentation and depressive reparation. Aesthetic fragmentation is actually exploratory. Raza's work illustrates a creative reworking of early dualities. So to conclude, his journey from childhood landscapes to the Bindu can be understood as a movement from raw emotional experience to symbolic crystallization. The early experiences of beauty and terror provided the emotional charge. The non-human served as stabilizing and overwhelming. The pre-Bindu symbols, the houses, the suns, the forests, perform the dual functioning of representing and epistemologically organizing these emotional forces. Raza's art exemplifies a fundamental psychoanalytic truth that aesthetic experience is not merely decorative or derivative, but it's deeply formative. It is a mode of emotional thinking, a method of transforming the unassimilated into the meaningful, and a path towards psychic integration. In his words, the first 10 years mark our entire lives. But as psychoanalysis reminds us, those 10 years do not determine our symbols. They provide the emotional material from which symbols can be made. Thank you so much.
It's a very difficult, but at the same time very illuminating in her own way. And of course, there will be questions later on this, but this whole idea of art as an organizing way for the kind of emotions that turmoil of the emotions is a very good idea. Thank you. Now, the last is Privrat Suni, and before he goes and sees something, I'll just he asserts that through his continual meditation on color, Raza, in the formless geometrical field, Raza finds new purpose for each of his canvas through its composition of color. In this way, he emerges at the pinnacle of modernism amidst globally recognized artists by carrying abstraction to its apotheosis in the realm of visual art. At the same time, his sustained meditations on color betray those methods that are employed in Indian classical and performing arts to attain mastery. That is repetition, iteration, and rigorous fixation on a single idea, thus lending him a distinctly Indian identity amongst other global artists. Privrat Soni. 15 minutes, huh?
Yes.
Katyayani exceeded by 3 minutes.
Can you dim the lights, please? So, the problem with serial killers isn't just that they have killed in the past, but that they have to keep killing. And that gets them the attention of legal enforcement. Let's start there, but in the context of painting. What happens when a series of paintings does not end? That's the question I see when I see the paintings of S.H. Raza. Not any particular painting, but the fact that he paints. How endlessly he paints, and how his painting always remains a part of his painting. Or does his painting become its own subset? Because it zooms in and out, it traverses horizontally and vertically, and all of this it does in response to the same inarticulate question. That question to which his act of painting is addressed. And I feel that it is that same question which is raised by M.F. Husain in his portrait of Raza. This question cannot be answered. It can only be colored. And only by Raza himself. So even Husain leaves that question unanswered. But let me return to my earlier question. What happens when a series of paintings does not end? I'm compelled to look at art forms which do not end per se, which do not conclude. Indian classical music, for instance, or classical dances. In these art forms, every performance renews the identity of the artist, or a raga, or a composition. There is no work over here, unlike you see in Western classical music or in the art of painting. In fact, the search for finality is embedded in the very modality of the practice of painting. If you have read Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldman, you will recall how Goldman keeps reattempting the statue of St. John over and over. And ultimately he does find a final figure. It's supposed to be that. And it is these final figures that come to be called as works of art. special emphasis on the word work here, when they are tended by the hands of a master. But we are talking about a series. What does a series do in the art of painting? It extends the scope of finality that a work of painting is predestined to. It affords a space to search further, be it an idea, a motive, or even something as abstract as a technical study. Yet the end of a series is predetermined, because if it doesn't end, if more works are being added to it, it's still in the process of becoming that series. It is also this conclusion that gives direction to the visual meaning of a series. Take Husain's horses, for instance. If we were to look at the identity of the paintings in Husain's horses series, where would we find it? In the way every horse of horses yelps, how these horses of culture defy the tamed horses of the world, how their gaping mouths sound alarm. This isn't something that the horses of our world do, right? Most importantly, the identity of these horses lies in how every horse has broken free in motion. It's literally broken free. They are disfigured to the extent of biological anarchy. It is in these attributes that the horses series finds its identity. This is the rule of this series in a way. In fact, the real horses appear decrepit after we look at Husain's horses. All of this is to say that a series engulfs its works under the shadow of a sign. All the works, despite being final in their scope, find their finality in the completion of a series. We may note that such a series is not always serial in nature. So to recap, we established three things so far. How the idea of a work imposes finality in the art of painting, how a series performs an extensive function, it extends this finality of a work, and a painting of a series, a painting in a series, despite being a work in its own right, draws its finality from the conclusion of that series. Now, keeping these things in mind, let's look at the later paintings of S.H. Raza. On the very first sight, these paintings disarm us with the simplicity of their lines. We can unfailingly see the geometrically literal and literally geometrical demarcation of space in these paintings.
Images are not.
It's not supposed to be there. No, not for this slide.
Not aligned then?
They are aligned, you'll see. We can unfailingly see the geometrically literal and the literally geometrical demarcation of space in his paintings. This is a rule that we could assign as the signature of that series to which these paintings belong. A series that is sometimes referred to as the Bindu. Sure, when we see some of these paintings, we are tempted to slot them in this set series, but then we run into two problems with this hypothesis. First problem. In this supposed series, each painting appears related to all the others at the level of lines. What I mean is, take the color away from these paintings, and these paintings resemble one another. Also, please keep in mind I'm talking only about the later paintings of Raza. And yet, when we take color away from each painting, we find no painting in the remainder. Second problem. When we see a few paintings, we may concede them to this hypothetical series, Bindu or whatever we choose to call it. There are 5 paintings and then 10 and then 20, but then we keep finding more. Are there 50? No, there are several hundreds. Could all of them really belong to this hypothetical series? And then what would an exhibition of this hypothetical series look like? It would be a gallery of hundreds of canvases. There would be a maddening play of geometrical lines on the walls, and there would be no end in sight. It would be a claustrophobia of geometry that contains an inexhaustible genetics of colors. Moreover, Raza even leaves an unfinished work in his dying breath, thus denying a conclusion to these, what shall we say, a collection of paintings. Together, these problems make us suspicious of our earlier hypothesis that all of these later paintings of Raza really do belong to a series. Now there is one more problem that adds to this conundrum, which is that these paintings don't differentiate themselves from others to the extent of exclusivity. They conjure a suspicion of sameness, and Raza himself was aware of repetition in his paintings, but we'll get to that point later if time permits. This sameness between paintings appears too simplistic a method for assimilating a series for a painter like Raza. It masks a more important truth that lurks in these paintings. But to return to the point of sameness and difference, you see one painting is a part of another, it reminds you of another, one is an extension of another, a collection of others, and a distension of others. Sometimes the canvas stretches on all corners, sometimes only on two. Even when we see each painting in its own terms, that is in the context of its title and inscriptions, the painting refuses to be circumscribed by its words. These paintings resist their titles. They deny those inscriptions even as the inscriptions appear to sit silently within the frame. When placed next to the canvas, the words become more abstract at the hands of lines and colors. They appear lost, as if these words have wandered into a world that they don't understand. Bharatiya Samaro, Surya Namaskar, why is one not the other? Mahabharat, Rajasthan, and then Om, Prakriti, Prarthana, Kundalini, Panchatattva, Suryodaya, Bhumi Dhyan, Deep, Darshan, Shanti, and so on. Each of these titles collapse under the autarky of these paintings. Even these powerful symbols, centuries-old truths are unable to convince the paintings of an alternative identity. The references of these words seem fabricated, as if they become lies when faced by the reality of these paintings. Perhaps some greater truth unfolds in the space of these paintings. But what truths? To answer this question, let's backtrack a little. If these paintings are neither works in and of themselves nor a series, then what are they? I feel compelled to use the word composition, but not in the sense in which it is used in visual arts. Instead, I am using this word in a musical sense. For those of you who are unfamiliar, let me define these concepts very quickly. In Indian classical music, a composition essentially binds. Special emphasis on the word bind here. It binds poetry to the musical notes of a raga and to a particular tal. And in Western classical music, composition is simply the process of creating music. And more importantly, which is how a work comes to exist. By combining and arranging musical elements like melody, harmony, and rhythm, and so on, a piece of composition comes into existence in Western classical music. I feel that the paintings of Raza are best described by this word composition, as it means and what it means in both Indian and Western classical traditions of music. In his paintings or compositions, the geometrical lines are not without a restraining effect. They close onto each other. They bind and they are rigorous in their rules. There is a kind of mathematical brutalism in these lines. The geometry of Raza is unlike the geometry of Russian painter Kandinsky, whose geometry is lenient and more unruly. However, the lines of Raza cannot even be called geometrical to be precise. They aren't simply shapes that fit into one another. Instead, they tie empty space. They bind the possibilities of space. Just like tal binds the possibilities of vistar or improvisation in Indian classical music. Even so, these lines are merely the mathematics of space. Just like tal was the mathematics of time for the great veena player Zia Mohyuddin Dagar, the music of these paintings begins and ends with the very stem of the word painting, that is color. In Raza, colors take form in that space that has been delimited by these lines. Then what emerges is a new composition in every frame. Here again I'm implying composition in the sense of Western classical music. Sometimes these compositions of color conjure a counterpoint. At other times, they turn microtones of color into a grand harmony. Sometimes both of these devices are at work on the same frame. These paintings aren't fragmented in their configuration as some critics have called them. Instead, there is a simultaneity, which sometimes works to the effect of harmony and other times of dissonance. There is a strange visual echo which reminds us of another painting of his own, although not entirely. This memory, it echoes only color back at us, as if all of these paintings were connected to each other through an underground channel, in which colors run around freed from their coincidental occurrence in the world. Perhaps these paintings really are connected to each other by this unending search that Raza undertakes through the act of painting. Like a raga that cannot be exhausted by a musician, each of these paintings of Raza elaborate the same cosmic composition of color. Here again, cosmic composition is implied in the musical sense. Even when the objective of an attempt is the same as before, the result is different every time. For instance, when you sit to sing Yaman or a musician performs Todi. In this way, Raza's Bindu emerges as an infinite painting, just as any raga is ipso facto an infinite raga. Each canvas is simply the next term of this painting that is incomplete by definition, because it's infinite and still unfolding. It is in conceiving and attempting this infinite painting that Raza becomes a serial painter. I have a very small note on his practice, and I'll end after that. Despite all the Western influence that is unarguably there on his style, there is something deeply Indian about the Bindu of Raza. Not in its content, that is to say, but in its modality and the practice of painting. In painting the Bindu, Raza employs those very methods that are applied by the practitioners of Indian classical arts, especially performing arts, to attain mastery. That is repetition, for instance, repeating sargam over and over, iteration, searching for novelty through improvisation rather than radical experimentation, although that could be debated now that I think, and maintaining an almost eccentric fidelity to a singular, highly structural form. He had himself said that, I'm quoting him, "I have no apology for my repetition of the form of Bindu." Clearly he was aware of the rule of novelty and the climate of experimentation that defines the very history and practice of visual art in the West. But he knew that the tradition in which he worked also expected an apology for this repetition. Yet his refusal is not a refusal of arrogance or stubbornness. It's one of necessity. The Bindu, in his own words, was inexhaustible. Of course, there was no canvas in the world which could accommodate this infinite painting. So he picks one canvas after another to paint this painting that could never end. Just like a musician sits to play Yaman or Todi, which by definition is a raga that she can never exhaust. In this way, Raza not only found a distinct Indian identity as an artist, but also envisioned a unique path in this predominantly Western art form. Thank you.
Yeah, so now it's, can ask questions. Just before that, one thing that you said that all paintings have conclusion, I don't think that's true. For example, the miniature paintings, if you see them, they just go on and on within themselves, you know. And even the position of the viewer as against the inner perspective, the viewer is always pushed out of the painting. In miniature, you get into that. If you carefully look at that. And then there is a non-conclusion there. There's no conclusion there. That was number one. And number two, the tal doesn't bind, doesn't stop the music. In fact, it allows that elaboration to happen. Tal only measures it only poses a challenge. When you put that, say, teen tal, So you're posing a challenge to the lay. Okay, now try and do that tempo, that lay in this tal. Then you do to change the tal. Let's say you are doing dugun then. So you now pose a new question. So the question answers of course take place, they take place within the lay also, but with tal also. And what you are saying instead of that, tal is opening the doors for the elaboration to become what you call infinite. And now there is open. If you want to ask, comment, shout. Yes.
एक मिनट माइक में दो।
I just want to talk to you about.
Oldie.
Yeah. Since I know that you're not from the art background, you're from the musical background, but you're reading of Raza's painting in a musical way. Now, when you said it and you combined the last slide, I can actually seeing all the painting together. It actually looks like a musical piece. But when you talk about the composition of the paintings, since you're not aware of the technicality of the subject, like when we study art, especially basics, like the fundamentals of art, it talks about the rhythm, it talks about the arrangements of the shapes and the symbols. And the most important and mesmerizing thing that I found about is that when I teach, I have been teaching for a long time, I'm teaching art for a long time, and that the exercise of the composition that we do in the class is like, being a teacher, I cannot be sure about it that it's a right composition or a wrong composition, because a composition can be, it just makes you feel the, feel the idea, right? That it should be a balance, there should be a rhythm, there should be a unity, that it's the same as it is in the music. So it is not like the way you are seeing the music, you can see the paintings as well. That paintings can also sing. That's my point.
Can I respond
Yeah, of
to
course.
a few things? To your suggestion about finality, I didn't imply finality in the sense in which something can be looked at. In that way, even trompe-l'oeil could be an example that a painting doesn't conclude. But ultimately, when an artist is drawing it, painting it, it comes to an end, even a piece of miniature. They stop adding to it. And secondly, regarding tal, it binds when you look at it from the perspective of alap. For instance, if you look at Dattiram Dev, in it he says that, you see, there are three elements in music, and the first, he places swar at the top of it. And then comes tal, and then comes word. And even if you look at Dhrupad music, an alap is much less bound in time and in the way in which a raga unfolds compared to a composition. And to address your point, absolutely a painting can sing. But yeah, I'm not saying that it cannot. That wasn't my point.
Just one comment, I think on seriality, and I just want to quote Gaitonde, what he told me. He said, every painting has a seed which germinates in the next painting. The painting is not limited to one canvas. I go on adding an element, and that's how it evolves. So on finality.
Interesting.
Nobody can keep on sitting there.
Can I add a word?
Yes, why not?
Huh? There is?
It's not a question, it's a small suggestion. We learned so much about the masters, but we haven't learned so much about the speakers. I request the Raza Foundation if they can put up more about the speakers, what they've studied, where they come from, what are they studying, what they want to do.
Bios.
That will help a lot.
Oh, biodata.
Yeah,
Of the speakers.
No.
Yeah, of course.
See, since we were emphasizing that you don't resort to biography too much, we might have forgotten that biodata. Anyway, can I? So we come to the end of this colloquium, which for us was also a leap in the dark, in the sense that we didn't know what kind of art writing among the younger generation taking place. Most of the times it is available in catalogue essays, and catalogue essays are summoned by galleries or artists, and they very carefully avoid being critical. So a catalogue essay is supposed to be some kind of a... Now, of course, even the publishers have started using it bluntly, in praise of whatever. So the catalogue essays are really in praise of whatever. So sometimes I felt that some of the presentations were like those catalogue essays. In fact, throughout, nobody seemed to have struck a critical note about any of these masters. I mean, at one time when we were young, we were encouraged, being young, to be questioning or interrogating or saying something critical. I suffered a lifetime of a relationship with a major writer about whom I wrote a piece, Budha Giddi Kyo Pankh Phailaaye. For 17 years that major writer was alienated from me. But I don't repent having done that. And nobody has said anything about any of the masters which was critical in the... Now, there is a kind of a shared language which uses too many unexamined concepts. Abstraction, figuration, colonial, post-colonial, etc., etc. As if this is taken for granted, as if they are well defined, as if, so at least for your own purpose, that in what way you are saying this. The third is, there seems to be some kind of a pitiable reliance on online information, which may also be now available from AI and all that. In fact, I am told you can get a whole essay written. Yes. My grandson showed me that this is what you spoke, and the transcript came, and it looked very clumsy. Anyway, he said, no, but this should be in the style of Ashok Vajpayee. And in less than a minute, there was something which looked like mine. I mean, so there is this huge danger. And what I'm saying is that, like the artist, the critic also has to have a personal voice. My own impression the impression that I got was that most of these speakers have not seen the works of these artists themselves in physical encounter with those works. I understand you are living in places where these works are not easily accessible, etc., etc. But then there are occasions, you should find occasions to, I don't know how many of you are going to the National Gallery of Modern Art today to see some of the works of these masters we have talked about. So there's a lack of personal encounter with artworks. Having said that, we were afforded an opportunity to see so many artworks on the screen. That was a good thing to do because words were sometimes becomes boring, sometimes not very illuminating, but the work of art holds. So that was a nice thing to do. Now, if you have any suggestions, we have committed mistakes and we know what mistakes we have committed, apart from not providing biodata. We were in fact planning to bring out a whole mimeographed booklet containing all the essays, but they did not arrive on time and things of that kind. The young are surprisingly rather lazy. They don't keep time limits, they have to be reminded and things of that kind, which I think is not a very healthy practice, not a good habit. You should learn to be on time, you should learn to send things on time, etc. It is not as if you are invited to 10 conferences in a year. Many of you might have been invited for the first time. And grateful as you are in your expression, you don't sort of do things on time. And that's what prevented us. So now we are going to request you, in the light of the comments that you have got, in the light of what you have heard others say about the same artist or about any other artist, you are given one more month to revise, expand, correct, etc., your essay. And you send it to us within 1 month. That is by the end of December, which is more than 1 month. And then we will decide whether the essays can be put together in a book. We are not too sure at the moment, so we are not promising you that the book shall appear. But we will consider the possibility, and we are open to the idea that a book should appear containing, if not all the essays, some of the essays. One interesting thing that emerged is that many of these young scholars are looking at these artists from different disciplines.
Yes.
I mean, in this itself, there were 3 from the psychological or psychoanalytical point of view, from the point of view of the tribal and folk traditions, and from the point of view of music. So this itself is a very rich area to pursue. These are interesting insights, just as we keep on saying the politics should not be left to the politicians, so art should not be left to artists and art critics. It should also be a matter of reflection by people who have access to other disciplines, and that should be possible. Sadly, in India, I know in literature and in other fields, there are not many who can do that because they are not equipped to do that. So whether you are equipped or not, I do not know, but hopefully you are. And if you are not, you will equip yourself better to pursue that line and see if something more interesting can yield through your effort. There might be some inconveniences caused to you. We are a very small team, and we have 4 or 5 people. All of them are here, in fact. And so if there are any lapses or any inconveniences, please pardon us. Let me also tell you very briefly about what the Raza Foundation does. The Raza Foundation is not limited to visual arts. Raza Foundation, visual arts, literature, classical music, classical dance, and ideas, and occasionally theatre, now architecture. So this is a vast area. Our resources are limited. We have an endowment given by the master and 1 crore of rupees given by Krishna Sukti. So our endowment comes out of that. why I am telling you these figures? Because Khajuraho Dance Festival, you might have heard of it, some of you might have seen it, was started by me in the year 1976 or 77. And I went to Secretary Tourism to ask for $1.5 lakh, which he granted me. And that's how the first Khajuraho Dance Festival took place. It had Yamini Krishnamurti, Birju Maharaj, Sayukta Panigrahi, etc., Uma Sharma, and so on. Now that dance festival has a budget, I'm told, of 40 crores, out of which only about 50 to 60 lakh goes to the artist by way of honorarium. The rest is spent on infrastructure, on Shamiana, on this and whatever. And we are very told every day that we have great infrastructure, we are on the best of airports and things of that kind. With some degree of hesitation, we built a Ram temple which started leaking in the very first year, in the first rainy season. The Ram Path, by which you go to the Ram Mandir, had 20 potholes in the rainy season. We have a new Parliament building which started leaking in the first rainy season. We have this Bharat Mandapam which also started flooded during the rainy season. So this is what infrastructure is all about. But we have very little money. We manage everything within 2 crores in a year. Forget about the amount that we spend out of this on administration and this, that and the other. So we are left with about 1.5 crore, in which we do 75 events in a year. We pay well, not too exorbitantly, but not too हम राम कुमार की स्टाइल के नहीं हैं, रजा की स्टाइल के हैं. Also, we have been publishing books in Hindi, including translations from other languages, including translations and originally written books about arts. We have published more than 200 books already, and we are still going on in that series. We have a biography project in which we have commissioned biographies already of some major Hindi writers like Agge, Mukti Bodh, Ravi Sahai, artists like J. Swaminathan, Syed Haider Raza. Then we have biographies of Nagarjun, etc. And biographies of Ustad Abdul Karim Khan, Sayukta Panigrahi, Zia Moinuddin Dagar. They are all in the process of being. It's a huge biography project. We run 8-9 annual memorial lectures devoted to Gaitonde, Habib Tanvir, Kumar Gandhar, Mani Kaul, Agge, Charles Korea, and Jantar Singh Shyam and Daya Krishna. And we provide financial assistance for many book projects and other kinds of projects. All this, my dear friends, is possible within this small amount. So imagine what is being done in the name of culture in the country, reducing culture to spectacle, to make culture tamasha, and millions of rupees, our money, is spent in the name of culture. You have 1,000 tabla players coming together. What nonsense! You have 2,000 Kathak dancers dancing on the banks of Ganga, or Ganga Aarti, etc. And millions of rupees are spent on this. Diya jalaya. We should not have a job, and the nation thought this is not our job. Inko diya jalana hai, wo jalaye. Par ab do diya jalana, etc. So we are in an ethos of opulence, an ethos of absolute fizul kharchi, in which in the Raza Foundation we are making an attempt to engage and to support, to provide some help during, for instance, I'll give you an example, during COVID. One of the worries was that, well, performing artists themselves are in a bad shape, but what will happen to the accompanists? Because they're so critically dependent. So finally, we had a small scheme of financial support to these accompanists and such like who needed money. We have provided money to people under indigent circumstances for medical purposes. That includes quite many important writers, I need not name them, and artists. So we do try to do all this, and we therefore need your support in terms of seriousness, in terms of rigorous work. This is an artist's money. This is not my personal money. This is not public money. This is money given by an artist. And therefore, there's something, I don't know what word to use, sacred about it. And we want you to keep that in mind. That you came on our invitation, we are very grateful, and we hope to keep an eye on you. We are hawks. I was once called cultural czar, but I am now a cultural hawk. So I keep on looking what is happening. And if some of you grow into something worthwhile, we will be very happy and we will be very proud of you. Thank you very much.